What is going on, boys and girls of YouTube? I haven't done any guide style content in a while, and with the new god coming out and her being the way she is, I knew instantly that I wanted to do a guide on it and I wanted to cover it. And I basically just so anyone who might be a little confused at first or after playing her a little bit can really just process it faster. I know when I first got on, after reading all the text and understanding, you know, how each ability works individually, it was still weird with the passive. But then once you play it a bit, or once I played it a bit, it kind of just hit me like how simple everything really is and where the damage really comes from. So I wanted to go right into a game and just break it down for you. I know a couple other people have done just like videos showing, I mean, I've done a bunch of videos on the, like just playing the god, but I know a bunch of other people have done videos showing how much damage she can do and stuff like that, like double J. And the thing is understanding where the damage is coming from, right? So the first thing is her passive, which is the most important part of her whole kit. I'll just show it here. Damaging an enemy with a basic attack or an ability. So not item procs, not autos or your ability damage will give them a soul spike. So boom, that little green thing right there, soul spike, right? Once you hit 5 of them, so you either auto them 5 times, you hit abilities 5 times, or a mix of the two, she does damage them. It says absorbs a piece of their soul, dealing damage based on their missing health. So this damage is what makes everything a little more confusing off the top. Like the beginning of this doesn't sound that difficult, but then it gets more difficult. So the damage is 0.6 per 1% of target's missing health. But this is, you know, based on what I currently have right now. The soul spike's damage cap is 70% of missing health. So it does damage based on how much missing health they have. So like this Odin has no missing health, right? So we get a proc 1, 2, so we got 3, 4, 5, right? He's not missing any health. There's really no bonus damage, right? So if we were to, and this is on everything, by the way. So this is on everything. It might be easier for me to just show you on Fire Giant, to be completely honest with you, which really saying it out loud sounds kind of weird, but yeah, it might just be better to show you over there. That's probably ideal, so I will do that. But the lifesteal build just show you. So yeah, Fire Giant, Gold Fury, creeps, jungle camps, all that stuff is affected by the passive, right? So it's a little bit harder to see the passive here, but what I can do is I can show you the passive damage on him right there, and you can see as it ramps up, it just keeps going and going and going. It's a lot of extra damage, right? It ends up being a huge amount of damage. My autos have done 4,000. My passive has done 1,000, right? So every 5 hits of ability or auto attack damage only procs your passive. Your passive is going to ramp up. The lower HP the target is, the more damage it's going to do. So when they get to that 50% mark or lower, that's when you're really going to feel and see the person start to just get chunked. And when they get chunked, it's gonna kind of come down to the fact that it's not actually your abilities hitting them really hard, it's that passive, and you can hear it, right? You see the passive damage. Obviously I'm running an AA build right now, you know, I have full power, whatever, but you can put the flames on them, that'll put up the passive, and you just see the damage going down. Watch. You hear it, the little ka-chink noise. That's the chunk that we're talking about. When they get low HP, that chunk is a ton of damage. Now, the next thing I get asked about is why do you spam your 1 a lot? So it's also, you know, not part of your passive, but one of the passive parts of this god. You have this fuel tank, right? This fuel tank never goes up unless it hits 0 and ends and your 1 goes on cooldown. Anytime you pop your 1, it uses fuel. As soon as it uses 5 fuel, it does damage. It doesn't do any extra damage for using more fuel, anything like that. When you hit him with a flame breath like this, it takes 3 times, 2, 3, right? So that's, you know, we get our 3 ticks, and then we can do it again, and it'll go all the way down. It'll go all the way down. It'll go all the way down. You know, we can keep canceling it, and this is really the ideal way to clear your jungle. When you're running around not clearing jungle, you want to have this very low, down to like 15, that fuel, that number, so that way you can, when you can run up and it'll stun instantly. When you stun by running out of fuel, so this goes to 0, meaning you stun, your 1 only goes on a 6-second cooldown, the lowest cooldown possible. Okay, so 6 seconds, it shows you. Now, if you were to walk up and press 1 and then left click, it goes on a longer cooldown because you're forcing that stun to go off, right? It was on an 11-second cooldown because I had so much fuel. So that extra cooldown time is based on the amount of fuel you have when you end the ability. So you could wait until you're at 50 and then cancel it, whatever you want. But the best possible thing to do is to let this fuel go all the way down, right click. You can do it quickly. It might be harder on controller, but you can do it quickly. Just burn 5 fuel. If you have higher ping, sometimes it'll automatically burn 10 because it won't go through fast enough. But you want to be sitting down here at this lower amount of fuel. And that's how you're going to look to engage. Your engagement combos are essentially going to be blink 1, boom, throw your 2 out. And then if he's not dead, you'll 3 into him. This is going to proc your passive multiple times. Now, during the combos, depending on your target, you know, if you're going to be killed, whatever it may be, you can throw in some autos. And that's where a lot of people get mixed up with, yo, auto attack build, is that the best? No, it's really not the best. The best thing for you to do is to get as many passive procs off as possible without taking a ton of damage. So if you can, you know, burn somebody and then walk away, then burn them again and then auto them a few times, get that passive proc, that's the play. If not, you know, you can do this, you can throw your 2 out, you can dash inside of them, then they get hit by a different passive proc. You're playing realistically in the hyper late game to get your passive proc to go off once. They'll usually die because of the amount of damage that you have. Your scaling is solid on this god. I think with the items, your kit with no mitigations, obviously, say someone's taking full damage, they can take up to 3,000 damage from your kit. That's not always going to happen, but with the passive procs, we're talking about really high damage numbers. So if you can get a second passive proc, if it's a tankier target, or if you're early or mid game, you're going to want as many passive procs as possible, right? So I'm gonna let him stun me. We're gonna auto him a few times. We're gonna get that 1 back up there again, and we're just gonna keep autoing, and then we'll throw the 2 out, we'll throw the 3 out. I'll show you without items here. So fuel low, right? We blink in, we 1, we stun him, autoing, throwing my 2 out. When he's about to hit me with something, you know, I could dash into him. We can avoid that. You can get a soft reset, so you're kiting them, you hit him with an ult, hit him with a 1, get a few more autos off, and you just get multiple procs of that passive, right? We end up doing 1,000 passive damage. This is our passive right here that did the most damage out of our whole kit, and by a lot, by a significant amount. I think that Maman is probably the only assassin that can beat out a 1v1 against a tank. There's a few others, you know, if Al Kwang goes on a tank and the tank doesn't have the beads or something, you might be able to win it. But realistically, it's been a long time since an assassin could walk up to a warrior in the mid game and win a 1v1. It pretty much hasn't happened in 5+ years, maybe even longer. Nowadays, with her, she can do it easily. She wins a ton of the 1v1s, and it catches tanks off guard because they're not expecting it. Like, oh, this is a full damage target, I'm not unkillable. They're not unkillable with this god. She's very, very good. So we're gonna also talk, that was just covering her kit, her combo, her passive, her 1. We'll talk about the 2. The 2 is also a little bit weird because it's a huge wall of text. So it's a snake ability, right? You can throw it out at that decent range. You can throw it out close. It can hit more than once if the person gets hit, you know, by the snake hit, like doing its little snaky stuff. You can see it slithers off her arm, blah, 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 blah. Subsequent hit, so like I said, it can hit more than once. It does 15% of the initial damage, so it's way reduced damage if it does hit more than once. Enemies hit with the mark take additional damage anytime Maman Brigitte damages them. This bonus damage does not trigger item effects, soul spikes, and item effects do not trigger Madam's mark. I said bark. So basically saying you can debuff somebody by putting the 2 on them, but your soul spikes do not proc it and items do not proc it. So your 1's gonna proc it, your auto is gonna proc it, your 3's gonna proc it, your ult's gonna proc it. So in a fight where you are able to engage with the 2, that is definitely ideal. You'll get that 2 out, you'll see that mark on them, that little skull right there that's on them, and then, you know, we put our 1 on them and we can auto them down and we can keep doing this. In a real scenario, we're not going to want a 2 first, right? Like right there, you see what happens when you 2 first. You're going to want to open with a stun, and then you'll be able to do your thing. He just canceled out my stun. Do your thing without it by getting your 2 up, autoing a few times, hitting your 3, and then you can also still proc it with the ult. The ult also puts on that debuff. The ult also marks them. So it shows here that the mark damage is 5 plus, you know, you're getting scaling out of it. If you are the full build I was before, try to throw it up real quick. We had Bancrofts with the tech speed. We had Typhons, some random build. Don't worry about it. So yeah, the mark is now doing 5 and then 30 more on top of that because of your scaling. So it's sitting for 35. It's a really solid ability, but the big thing for this is still that it just procs the passive. It gets that passive proc. There's a lot of times where you'll get someone very, very low. So I'm gonna go try to do it to this guy. So he's got that soul spikes on him. So there's 4 soul spikes on him. That damage right there is not the 2 hitting. That's the 2 in the passive hitting, right? There's times where they'll get distance. You're like, man, they're so close to dying. If I can get that passive proc, that 2 is going to be that core thing. While I don't use the 2 for major damage burst, I use it to get the mark damage and to get the passive up. I'm always paying attention to the passive. The passive is by far the most important thing. Even with your 3, it's a very similar situation. The 3 is going to be used for 2 things. Your 3 is essentially Nox dash, but it dashes into the enemies rather than like Nox dashes into teammates. So you can dash into them, buy yourself a lot of time. You can get multiple procs of your passive onto them off of it, right? Which is very, very strong. And then on top of that, you can follow them wherever they go. So like I had a starter try to get away with his ult last night. I jumped inside of him, went up with him in the ult, landed. My whole kit's back up by then. So you can use it to buy time. You can use it to follow, and you can use it to proc the passive. The other thing with the dash is if you dash into them and you wait it out fully, it will dash out, right? If you dash into them and you left click, it will also dash out. If you dash into them and right click, it will drop out right on top of them. So you can dash in and right click and you will be right here, which is, you don't want to do it all instantly. You want to get some procs to that passive, but if you go into somebody to avoid damage or to not get CC'd or something along those lines, you don't want to get away from them, you want to kill them, you're just going to right click to drop out of them. But like I said, if you also want to sit inside and left click, you'll dash at full range. So that's how that 3 works. That 3 does very good damage. It's not, none of the none of the abilities on this god have crazy high damage by themselves. They have solid damage, don't get me wrong. Like the slam on this is hitting for 400. I'm full build, it's hyper late game, whatever. The fire ticks 3 times, it's hitting for 100, so it hits for 300. So this whole ability does hit for 700 hyper late game. But it's a mage. There's mages that have, you know, like Scylla 2 hits for 1200 late game, especially with full build like this. Your 2, it hits for 150 plus 240, so it's close to 400. The mark is hitting for what it's hitting for. It's solid damage, but this is hyper late game. 400 damage on ability hyper late game is not good. There are guardians and warriors whose base damage with no scaling is hitting for 400, right? Then your 3 is hitting for 180 plus 120 on the initial hit, and then the ticks afterwards are hitting for 90. So this is hitting for basically like 500, right? Ish, somewhere around there. Solid damage, but not that crazy. When it gets crazy is when you pair with that passive. Those procking, the fact that your 3 is going to hit for 4 times by itself, right? Your 2 is going to hit once. Your 3 is going to hit, I think it's the initial hit and then 4 more times, maybe 3 more times. Travel with them and dealing damage every 0.5 seconds for up to 2 seconds. So yeah, it'll hit up to 4 more times. So that can hit 5 times on its own. This will hit once on its own. This will hit 4 times on its own. So you can proc the passive twice from your 3 abilities with no auto attacks. That's where that big damage comes in. And that's why this god is so good. And that's why this god is going to be hard for them to nerf and get it right, because she's going to need a damage nerf. Her damage is much higher than anyone else's has been in a long time, which I'm all about. I like releases being super strong so they can just tone it down and allow people to play it and figure it out instead of playing a boring god that does nothing and having to buff it later and no one wants to play it. I like that. The big thing about this god that I want everyone to understand whenever they play her, this ultimate is not a big damage, you know, like must hit damage ability, right? I use this to CC, to get CC immunity a lot of the time, or just to set up the team. I don't always use it as like a killing ultimate, right? Like it is very, very good. Don't get me wrong. It's a very good ultimate. Like that's solid damage. It hit for 700, 230 was mitigated. It's solid damage. It puts on the mark, right? But that's not the big thing about the ultimate. It's being able to CC immune, being able to set up yourself, being able to set up your teammates, being able to buy yourself time while the rest of your kit goes up. Because like I said, you're playing around that passive. You're not playing around just raw nuke damage. Don't get me wrong. It hits decently hard. But for an ultimate on a 90-second cooldown, full build, you're hitting for almost 1,000 as a mage. That's not crazy damage. It's nowhere near crazy damage. The other thing to note about this is you have a second part of this fuel passive. I'm going to try to show you here if it'll let me. So you see this orb I got by getting procs of my passive. So these orbs, they will go away after 30 seconds. These orbs make your ult bigger. So I have 3 of them. I got 4 of them. I got 5 of them. So this ult is going to get a lot bigger now. You can see that circle is almost twice as big. That's max size. I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. It's obviously very useful, but it's not priority by any means. There's just no world where it's priority. So that's the god. That's a breakdown of the kit. Those are the things you need to understand. For the builds, don't overthink it. High power and cooldown, very good for high power cooldown lifesteal. Very good for throwing in, you know, like one auto attack item, like a Telkines into a build like this. Very, very strong. So this is essentially a build that Leona runs on Ao Kuang. It works. Mage build works. High power works. I've seen people running like full attack builds, auto attack builds. I would not do that personally. You can do whatever you want. I don't think that'll be the play. I think you'll definitely be playing around high power because that's going to get you those big procs of everything that you're looking for, where the A build is simply just going to be on you trying to get passive procs, and doesn't play out the same as you think it would. So I would do power, cooldown, lifesteal. Lifesteal is not a priority, but you know, there's a lot of very good lifesteal items right now. Throw in one auto attack item like a Telkines. I wouldn't go any of the other auto attack items if I were you, and have fun. Good luck with it. Hopefully this video helps you guys out. It is one of the longer ones. I haven't done like a full coverage of a god. I felt like most gods lately have been really simple, very simplistic, and just not exciting. Where this god, I've played her a lot. I think I've played, like, I know a lot of people yesterday were grinding rank 1, but before, like on PTS, I think I had played 15 to 20 games of her. And then last night I played 5 or 6, and I have her down. I have her down. Probably the best release we've seen in 2 years. If you're a jungler, you're gonna have a lot of fun. If you're solo, you can play her, but she really doesn't come online till you get an item. Once you get an item, you can kill those solo laners. I wouldn't play her in any other role. I think you're gonna have a bad time in other roles. If you guys have any questions, any comments, any concerns, just drop them in the comments. I read every comment that goes through my YouTube channel, so I appreciate you guys. Hit the like button, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you in the video later tomorrow, the next day, and the next day.